The truth is a cobalt blue flame, burning bright and cold in the heart of the most dangerous secrets. We peel back the layers of deception to show you what lies beneath the surface of reality. Subscribe now and watch the big reveal in our very next video.
My brother has always been the kind of person who fills a room before he even walks into it. You hear him coming. The laugh first, then the footsteps, then the voice. And by the time he actually appears in the doorway, everyone is already smiling. I used to think that was a gift. Now I think it was just very effective marketing. His name is on the family wall in the hallway of my parents' house. Not literally. They didn't carve it in wood or anything, but you know what I mean. His high school jersey is framed above the fireplace. His college graduation photo is in the center of the mantel, flanked by my parents' wedding portrait on one side and a picture of my grandparents on the other. My photo, the one from my own graduation, is in the hallway, near the laundry room. It's a nice frame. I'm not saying this to be dramatic. I'm saying it because by the time my sister-in-law's parents' anniversary party happened, their 40th, a big catered event at a private venue outside the city, I had made a kind of peace with the geography of my family. I knew where I stood. I knew which wall I was on. I had stopped expecting to be moved to the mantel. What I had not prepared for was being told. In the middle of a room full of people I had never met, exactly what my parents thought I was. I should tell you what I do, not because it matters to the story or maybe it matters more than anything else, but because context is useful. I'm a structural engineer, have been for 6 years. I work primarily on infrastructure, the kind of projects most people don't think about until a bridge stays standing through a hurricane and someone writes an article about it. I've been part of 2 of those articles. I'm not bragging. I'm explaining the gap between what my parents believed about me and what was actually true, because that gap is where this whole story lives. My parents are not cruel people. I want to say that clearly. My mother remembers birthdays and sends cards with handwritten notes and once drove 4 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu. My father taught me to ride a bike and showed up to every school play, even the ones where I had 2 lines. They are not cruel, but they have a picture of what success looks like, and for as long as I can remember, I didn't fit inside it. My brother fit perfectly. He's in finance. He wears good suits and shakes hands the right way and says things at dinner that make my father nod slowly, the way he does when he's impressed, but trying to seem measured. My brother married a woman named, I'll call her my sister-in-law, who is warm and funny and genuinely kind to me, which made the party both better and worse, depending on which moment you're looking at. The anniversary party was for her parents' 40th. They'd rented out this venue, an old converted carriage house, ivy on the stone walls, round tables with white linens, the kind of place that photographs beautifully even with your phone. I had been looking forward to it, honestly. I like celebrations. I like the moment when the lights are soft and everyone is a little dressed up and the food is good, and for a few hours nothing is complicated. My parents offered to drive together. We live about 45 minutes from the venue, and my mother had texted the week before to say they'd be coming from my brother's place, so we could all caravan if I wanted to follow. I said yes. It seemed simple. 3 days before the party, my father called. Not my mother, my father, which should have told me something. He said my mother had forgotten that they'd promised to help set up early, and there was some mix-up with the florist, and they were going to head over a couple of hours ahead, and it might just be easier if I drove myself. He said it very nicely, very apologetically. He used the word sweetheart, which he does when he's uncomfortable. I drove myself. I got there about 20 minutes before things were officially supposed to start, which meant the room was half full and the staff was still adjusting centerpieces, and my parents were already at a table near the front, sitting with my brother and his wife and her parents, and 2 other couples I didn't recognize. My mother waved at me from across the room, not a come here wave, the other kind. I found my place card near the back at a table close to the side door that the catering staff kept walking through. There were 6 seats at my table. 2 of them were for a couple who turned out to be the neighbors of someone's college roommate. 1 seat was for a man who arrived late and spent most of the night on his phone. 1 was for a woman who introduced herself, chatted with me for about 10 minutes very pleasantly, and then spent the rest of the evening talking to the man on her left. And 1 was for me. I sat with my water glass and my bread plate, and I watched my parents across the room, at the table near the front, and I thought, okay, this is where I am. And I decided I was going to have a good time anyway, because the food smelled incredible and the music was nice and I was wearing a dress I actually liked. And sometimes you just decide. Sarken. It was working, mostly. I had gotten through the salad course and was halfway through what turned out to be an excellent piece of salmon when my mother came over. She brought a woman with her, one of the couples from the front table, someone's close friend, and she touched my shoulder and said brightly, "This is my daughter. She's our independent one." The woman smiled at me. I smiled back. My mother said, "She's always done her own thing. We never quite knew what to do with her." And she laughed. The woman laughed. It was a perfectly pleasant, party-appropriate laugh, the kind that means nothing and lands like a stone. I said something. I don't remember what. Something neutral, something that kept my voice level and my face arranged correctly. My mother squeezed my shoulder and moved on, and the woman said something nice about my dress and followed her, and I picked up my fork and looked at my salmon. I had known this about my parents for years. I had sat with this knowledge, examined it from different angles, talked about it with exactly 2 friends and 1 very good therapist. I had arrived at something like acceptance. What I had not accounted for was how it would feel to hear it said out loud to a stranger as a kind of introduction, as if we never quite knew what to do with her, was a fun fact, a personality quirk, something to lead with. I finished my salmon, I drank my water. The man on his phone looked up briefly and offered me the bread basket. I took a piece. The speeches started after the main course. My sister-in-law's father gave one that was funny and genuine and made everyone dab their eyes a little. Her mother gave one that was shorter and even better. My brother gave one. He'd been asked to say a few words, which, sure, fine, and it was good actually. He's good at speeches. He told a story about the first time he met my sister-in-law's parents and how her father had immediately handed him a rake and put him to work in the garden, and everyone laughed in that warm, recognizing way. I clapped. I meant it. During the applause, a man appeared at my table. Not my table, exactly. He pulled out the empty chair 2 seats down from me, the one that had been empty all night, and sat down with his plate and his glass like he'd been there all along. He was older than me, probably mid-50s, silver at his temples, the kind of tidy that suggests habits rather than effort. He nodded at me. I nodded back. We sat through the rest of the speeches in comfortable silence. When the applause died down and the servers started moving again, he poured himself more water and said, without preamble, "Good salmon. Really good," I agreed. He said his name was, I'll call him the man at my table. He said he worked in infrastructure development, which made me sit up slightly, because that's not a phrase most people use in party conversation. I told him what I do. He looked at me with an expression I can describe as careful interest. Like something had come into focus. He said, "Which firm?" I told him. He set down his water glass. He said, "You worked on the Hartfield Overpass project." It wasn't a question. The Hartfield project had been in the news about 18 months earlier, not because anything went wrong, but because of how something almost did and then didn't, which is rarer than people think. I'd been on the analysis team. My name was in the engineering report that got cited in 2 different industry publications. I said yes. He said, "I read that report 3 times. We used it as a reference for a project in my department." He named the department. I won't put it here, but it's the kind of name that makes people go quiet for a second. I went quiet for a second. We talked for the next 40 minutes about load distribution, about the particular challenges of aging infrastructure in regions with freeze-thaw cycles, about a project his team was working on that had hit a wall. Conceptually, not literally, though he joked that sometimes it felt like both. I told him about a problem I'd solved early in my career that was loosely related, and he asked 2 follow-up questions that told me he actually understood what I was describing, which doesn't happen as often as you'd think at parties. My father came over during this. He was doing his circuit of the room. He always does this at parties. The gracious host's orbit. Even when he's not the host. And he appeared at the edge of the table with his jacket buttoned and his easy smile. He nodded at the man at my table. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the same shoulder my mother had touched, I noticed, and said, "Glad you found some company, sweetheart." The man at my table looked at my father. He looked at him with the kind of calm that comes from being someone who does not need anything from you. He said, "I was just telling your daughter, I'm sorry, I don't want to presume, are you her father?" My father said yes warmly. The man said, "I was just telling her that her analysis on the Hartfield Corridor study has been circulating in federal infrastructure circles for over a year. We actually built part of our methodology around it." He said the name of his department again, very clearly, and then added the name of the specific federal office he was working with. "She's very well regarded. You must be proud." My father's face did something complicated. I watched it happen in real time. The easy smile stayed. Muscle memory, probably, but something behind it shifted. He said, "Of course, yes, she's always been. Yes." He said he needed to check on something. He excused himself. I watched him walk back to the front table. I watched him sit down. I watched him lean toward my mother and say something. I watched my mother look across the room at me. She did not come over. The man at my table refilled his water glass. He didn't say anything about what had just happened, which was exactly the right move. He asked me instead about a bridge project I'd mentioned, whether the timeline had been affected by the materials shortage 2 years back. We talked for another 15 minutes. When the dessert came, he shook my hand, said it had been a genuine pleasure, handed me his card, and went back to wherever he'd come from. I looked at the card for a moment and then put it in my bag. At the end of the night, my mother found me near the coat check. She hugged me. It was a real hug, the kind that actually reaches your back, not just your shoulders. She said, "I didn't know you'd done something like that. The bridge thing. Didn't realize." I said, "I know." She said, "You should have told us more." I stood with that for a second. I thought about all the dinners where I'd tried to explain what I worked on and watched her eyes go gently, politely distant. I thought about the conversation I'd had with my father 2 years ago when I'd mentioned being cited in an industry report, and he'd said, "That's nice," and immediately changed the subject to my brother's new apartment. I said, "I did tell you. A few times." She looked at me. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, more like the beginning of guilt, the moment right before you decide whether to let it land or step around it. She said, "Well, we're proud of you. You know that." I said, "I know you love me. That's not the same thing." She didn't have an answer for that. Didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it was true, and because I was 31 years old, and I was tired of pretending the distinction didn't matter. I got my coat. I hugged her goodbye. I hugged my father, who held on a beat longer than usual. I hugged my brother, who whispered in my ear, "I've been trying to tell them for years," which I believed, because my sister-in-law had told me the same thing once, and she's not a person who says things she doesn't mean. I drove home alone. The highway was mostly empty. I had the radio on low, some station playing songs I half knew, and I thought about the man at my table and how strange it is that sometimes the person who sees you most clearly is the one who had no reason to look. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying about this a long time ago in a therapist's office on a Tuesday afternoon, and what I felt driving home wasn't grief anymore. It was something quieter. Not resolution. I don't think families resolve exactly. I think they shift, slowly. Sometimes they shift because something breaks them open. Sometimes they shift because a stranger at a party says a thing plainly that you've been trying to say for years and couldn't, and suddenly the air in the room is different. My mother texted me the next morning. She said she'd been thinking about what I'd said. She said she wanted to hear more about my work sometime if I wanted to share it. She said she was sorry she hadn't listened better. It was a text message. 11 sentences. I read it 3 times. I wrote back, "I'd like that. Let's have dinner soon." And I meant it. Not because everything was fixed, because it wasn't, and not because I'd forgotten what it felt like to sit in the back of that room near the catering door while my parents held court at the front. I meant it because I'm not interested in keeping score anymore. I'm interested in what's actually possible, and what's actually possible between me and my parents is still being written. And I'm not ready to close the book just because some of the earlier chapters were hard to read. The man from the party emailed me the following week. He said his team had a project in early planning stages and they were looking at outside consultants. He said he'd thought of me. He included a brief on the project and said, "No pressure, but if I was interested to let him know." I read the brief twice. It was exactly the kind of problem I'm good at. The kind that looks straightforward until you're inside it, and then it turns into something that requires you to think in 3 dimensions and hold a lot of variables at once, and trust the math even when the math makes you nervous. I wrote back that I was interested. I didn't tell my parents, not because I was keeping it from them. I just didn't feel the need to run it past them first, to see if it registered as real, to measure my worth against their understanding of it. That particular habit, the one where I cupped something I'd done in my hands and carried it over to them to see if they'd recognize it, I think that one is over. I still go to dinner. I still answer when they call. Last week, my father asked me, haltingly, with the careful precision of a man reading from a script he'd only just written, what exactly the Hartfield project had involved and why it had been significant. I told him. He listened. He asked a follow-up question. It wasn't a great question, but it was a real one, and I answered it. And we sat there at my parents' kitchen table in the house where I grew up and had an actual conversation about my actual work. For the first time in 6 years. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." My father has never been good at that phrase. But at the end of it, he said, "You're good at this," and for him, that's the same thing. I'm choosing to take it as the same thing. I'm still the daughter whose photo is near the laundry room. Maybe that changes. Maybe it doesn't. I've decided it matters less than I thought, because the wall where it counts is not in my parents' hallway. It's in the work. It's in the reports that circulate in rooms I'll never sit in, attached to projects that will outlast the party and the salmon and the dress and the complicated look on my father's face. That's where I put my name, and it's holding up just fine.